Welcome back to another episode of the Barron Report as we continue our coverage on the coronavirus impact on the restaurant industry. And of course, the biggest thing that we're seeing out of Capitol Hill recently has been the aid package that is including some paid sick leave for companies that are 500 employees or smaller. And of course, in many cases, this will represent a large part of the restaurant community. Also want to report to you on some of the companies that actually have started paid sick leave programs. Companies like Ann Pizza, Michael Astoria up there, their CEO, essentially has put a sick leave program in place for obviously the coronavirus impact, but also for anyone that does get sick in relation to COVID-19, they're also sending their employees free pizza for them and their families. So some great things are coming out of this in terms of operations. And of course, companies like Cava, Panera Bread, KFC, McDonald's, we've seen a fairly big movement toward paid sick leave of some sort, whether it's an accrued program, including Darden, or if it is some sort of paid medical sick leave, all the way up to a 14-day quarantine to deal with this coronavirus aspect. This kind of falls in line with what we've seen on the most recent news coming out of Capitol Hill and the National Restaurant Association, and that is ways to assist workers that either one are losing their jobs or have been caught in essentially a shutdown from the industry. And one of the elements was a $130 million disaster unemployment assistance, which essentially would be ramping up unemployment assistance in the states at the tune of $130 million. While I do think that is a very light number versus what we will need in the industry, at least it is a getting started number that can start moving into companies and employees that have lost their jobs of recent. We will continue to hit more reporting here in terms of, especially the paid sick leave aspect. I think this is going to become kind of a silver lining in this very dark cloud of companies that are changing their operational guidelines and their employment guidelines and how they'll be dealing with employees in the future. So make sure and catch all that great coverage right here on the Barron Report. Also, stay tuned right here because here's an interview I did on Cheddar talking about the state of the restaurant industry. You don't want to miss it. We'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to Between Bells, everyone. Well, here we are tracking the coronavirus and how it's affecting every working staff in America. But the food and beverage industry is one of the main businesses getting hit the hardest. Joining us now to discuss is the CEO of Foodable Network, Paul Barron. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time here on the day. OpenTable reports restaurant dining is down 42% amid the coronavirus outbreak. What is the forecast for the restaurant industry over the next 90 days?
Yeah, so we've been tracking the restaurant industry in terms of closures and also down in sales. Our Foodable Labs data model that we're working on right now, which is our L2 model, essentially has been looking at the closures initially. This is closures that are happening that are not forced by the government, meaning the down in restaurant business is causing the closure, or actually where the government has asked the restaurant to go to take out and delivery only. So by end of end of March, 28,695. By 4/20, the model goes to 56,000. And by 5/25, we're looking at 81,000. And currently our model only reports on about 45% of the industry. So you would look at almost a doubling effect of that in terms of real numbers hitting the industry, providing we don't see a major quarantine.
And so we were looking at some of the restaurant closure impacts, but what about the hard figures and the revenue as well? What is the revenue impact that we could be looking at?
Yeah, so we look at weekly revenue as kind of our baseline, which right now currently within our data set is about $5 billion a week. That starts to drop $2.9 billion weekly by 3/30, dropping $2.9 billion, and then dropping down a whopping $4.1 billion by 20th of April, and by 5/25 we might see some stabilization, which would be about $2.7 billion a week in dropped sales. And again, if you extrapolate that into the total industry, because again, we're tracking around 40 to 45% of the industry currently, mostly high performers, that could be catastrophic for the business as a whole. You look at the National Restaurant Association, which just submitted a recovery plan to the House, which was essentially asking for about $145 billion in relief which may or may not even be enough for what we're dealing with in terms of immediate impact on the restaurant business.
Absolutely. And so right now, when you're looking at how this is going to change the fabric of how people dine, and where we had already seen a move for many of these smaller restaurant businesses, mom and pop shops, dining experiences, to move away from some of the high real estate costs that they had to take on. We saw the food truck craze really blossom and grow up in front of our eyes as well. How could this push more restaurants into new ways of servicing their customers?
A great question. We've been tracking this for a couple of years now in the sense of moving to takeout and delivery. Ghost kitchens, of course, have already kind of made their presence on the dining scene. I think the bigger question is going to be the consumer mindset after all of this is done, because that'll essentially kind of drive the restaurant industry as a whole. Fast casual, the category that pretty much is the leader in the restaurant industry, is probably one of the categories that's going to win big. Once we get past this, and those who survive it are going to be able to kind of shift their business. In the past, it's been about a good restaurant that's doing great in terms of takeout and delivery, usually around 15 to 20% of sales. We see that potentially climbing into the 40 to 45%, which would completely change how restaurants do business and how they operate in a very, very big way.
It sounds like Travis Kalanick actually might get the last laugh at the end of all of this with cloud kitchens and developing that after leaving Uber. We will see, and time will tell. Ultimately, though, you've started a Coronavirus International Action Committee. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so essentially what we're looking at is solutions within operators that are actually weathering this storm. What kind of best practices are they doing? So if you go to foodabletv.com/coronavirus-impact, it'll take you into it. You'll see a lot of content there, but you'll also see some ways that operators are sharing their stories on how they're dealing with this, whether it's doing staff layoffs or changing their operations, shifting over to new models. It's really kind of a community. That's the cool thing about the restaurant industry, is it is very community driven, and the CEOs are amazing in it. They will share ideas and best practices with their competitor down the street. It's pretty amazing to watch in a time like this, for sure.
Just quickly, Paul, before we let you go, actionable insight. What can a restaurant do right now to try and stave some of the blow, stave the impact off from hitting their business?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that you're going to find right now is they're going to have to start shrinking their menus. Supply chain is going to be affected here, so menu consolidation is going to happen. Also, I think from a staff perspective, to be able to save some jobs within a restaurant that might be facing either closure or a very heavy impact on sales, is start to reposition those jobs into other aspects of the business, whether it is marketing or maybe even in delivery. There's some opportunities here, I think, for some very creative and innovative restaurant operators, and this industry is no shortage of innovation. So I think we'll see continuous new best practices and new ways to stay in business. The one I'm most worried about is the bar business, which is essentially been decimated. Their ability to shift over to maybe some food and menu operations is going to be struggling for them. That's the one category I think is going to have the most hard hit issue in the industry.
Yeah, we're certainly looking at that impacting many of New York City residents as they find themselves in this midst of the fallout, especially in the restaurant and bar industry as well. Foodable Network CEO Paul Barron joining us here today. Thanks so much for the actionable insights as well.